I just met this guy, and I gave him my tickets to see if I won anything, and he couldn't find any winners. Now, there were 2 tickets that weren't claimed. I will be checking those tickets. All right, well, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Greg.
Hi, my name's Greg. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I'd like to thank the committee for asking me to come here. Phil, who asked me to be here. It's just a wonderful convention. Any place where you see AA active and alive after 51 years, you know that there are legacies and traditions and people that have put this on and put in a lot of work to do it, that are really committed to it. And when you have people like that all around AA, it always shows, right? So I have been married to my wife, St. Jean, for 43 years, and she's on something with my daughter with church, and so she couldn't be here, but she's going to be on her way here in a little while. She'll be here by tonight, I'm sure. And the reason I say that is that she is an Al-Anon, and she could actually come closer to the truth than what I'm going to, because I'm just going to give you some things as I remember them, right? And as a good blackout drinker, there are a lot of things I just don't quite remember. Very, very grateful to be here. Very grateful for the people in Alcoholics Anonymous that were there when I got there. They carried the message of AA, the 12 steps. I will be forever grateful for those people, many of which have gone on, but I love them dearly. Look forward to the meeting on the other side of the fence with those guys, you know. What I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I was born into an alcoholic family. My father's family. My father was the oldest of 11 kids, 10 boys and 1 girl. My father was not an alcoholic. My father's passed away, and not one time did I ever see my father intoxicated. Yet he would drink, and it was a complete waste of booze. Total waste. It did nothing for him. As a matter of fact, if it would start to do something for him, he stopped, right? And so I've never seen my mother intoxicated either, yet my mother would drink, and it was the same way. Of my dad's 10 brothers, my Uncle Jack brought me to my first meeting. My Uncle Terry brought me to my first meeting. My Uncle Bob died of an overdose on something they used to detox people with in the old days. It was called paraldehyde, a form of formaldehyde. And he overdosed on that and died. And I was a young kid, about 8, 10 years old. And the big thing was my brother and I going to be able to go to the funeral? You know, was that going to be too traumatic or whatever? And I will tell you that my Uncle Bob carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to me in my very first weeks in AA, because I remember the thought, if I am, I don't want to end like that. So even though I was just 10 years old, my uncle would carry the message to me. Also, my Uncle Bill, my Uncle Danny, and my Uncle Jack, all alcoholics, all of them. My grandfather's an alcoholic. I told this story earlier today to somebody. My grandmother, her Al-Anon sponsor was Wilbur Dozier's wife, if any of you remember Wilbur Dozier. But anyway, my grandmother tells a story. On one Saturday, the police came to the house 3 times for 3 separate instances for 3 of her sons. Is that good stuff? Now that's my stock right there, buddy. That's my gene pool. You know what I mean? The same day, she's bailing out 3 kids on one Saturday. That's my grandma, baby. And she is a saint. And again, I look forward to seeing her. On my other side, my mother's side of the family, her youngest brother, Denny, I 12-stepped and died of cirrhosis of the liver. got 2 cousins now on that side of the family that are also in AA. So if you're a Grody, you're either in AA or you need AA. I'm here to tell you. And anyway, first thing that I see in Alcoholics Anonymous, all these things that I tell you, I look back upon. My first drink was warm Wiedemann beer, building a log cabin behind the cemetery. In that log cabin, we had an axe, a machete, or 2 axes and a machete, and we cut down these trees in the forest behind the cemetery. And that log cabin would hold 6 sleeping bags, so that's how big it was. And then we stole some boards that I have not made amends for, by the way, at the cemetery to put on for the roof, and we cut a hole in the roof. And so you could stand up on one side, and it was 3 feet high on the other side, just so that the sleeping bags could fit. And I had warm Wiedemann beer. And it worked. It did something for me and set my life on a completely new pattern. At that time, I had no idea how confused, how afraid, and how just uncomfortable I was at all times. Again, these things, looking back, you know what I believe that happened that day? I never, ever, ever wanted to be sober ever again. If I could have just stayed drunk, you know? Because booze and drugs have never been the problem. It's always been the solution in my life. It was the only thing that filled that hole. I've heard it 1,000 times. Felt different, drink the booze, I'm okay. I could say things that I normally wouldn't say. I could do things that I normally wouldn't do. And I could be with people and do things that I normally would not do. It was wonderful. It was being part of life. It put me in the middle of life. It didn't take away life. It put me in the middle of life. And the most natural thing, I believe, for me to do to this day is to pick up a drink and have a solution for what ails me. Thank God for the 12 steps, because that is the solution in the yearning that I found that I was looking for in booze. That was it. So I started drinking. Now, my mother and father, being non-alcoholic, coming from alcoholic homes, they were not going to raise an alcoholic. Sorry about your luck, you know. So they were going to ground me into sobriety. It's the way that it was. Later on, as the tornado roaring through the lives, I had the chance and the opportunity to bring alcoholism into my home. And it ravaged our family, ravaged it. And the first thing that was affected was all my primary relationships with my mother, my father, my brother, and my sister, most importantly. And a lot of those people around me, one of which was those guys that built that log cabin with me. You know what? None of them are alcoholic. And so they lasted about another year, year and a half. Because I wasn't going to hang. I want the faster, the quicker, the thing. Who has the best? I'm going there, right? And so I would change friends like underwear. Wherever the party was, I'm your guy, right? And so that's the first thing that happened, though, is it splintered my relationships at home. And later on, the way I look back on my father is I had a tremendous hate for my father. Tremendous hate for him. And I know the reason why, because I viewed my father just like he had a blue light on top of his head. He was always trying to catch me. Always. That was his whole focus. That untreated Al-Anon, he was just always trying to catch me. And I looked at him as I would look at a police officer. We all hated police. We were all guilty. You don't like police when you're guilty, right? And so that's the way I looked at my father. Well, my mother and father had a plan. I lived in northern Kentucky. They sent me I went to a high school over in Cincinnati, Ohio, 25 miles from the house. It was a Jesuit high school. And it was the best education that money could buy. And my mother and father had a plan because they were phenomenal parents. And their plan was very simple. You're going to go to this high school. You'll be prepared to go to a good college. Then you'll be prepared to have a good job, or you'll be prepared to go to graduate school, and everything will work out. But we're going to set you off on this foundation to get you ahead in life. And it worked perfect for my brother. It worked perfect for him. He was a National Merit semifinalist. He was on the Honor Society. He got a full-ride scholarship to Youngstown State University, graduated magna cum laude, and went off to UC Law School, and he's a lawyer, and he's on his $3 million home. It was a great plan for him, right? 7 days left in my junior year. I'm high on Valiums. I've smoked a joint. I look up and I see a triple beam scale. I steal the scale, get paid off in a quarter-pound of pot, and I got kicked out of school. And the next year, I would repeat my junior year at Covington Catholic High School. And on the very first ever 20-mile hike for that school, it's still going on today that the kids get sponsors and walk 20 miles. I've been out of high school a few years. And so on that very first ever 20-mile hike, I did something called Jimson seeds. Jimson seeds come up in the hot of the summer, and you harvest them in the fall. And this walk was in October, and I had never had Jimson seeds before. But I did some Jimson seeds, and I hallucinated for 4 days, strapped down to a hospital bed in St. Elizabeth Hospital in Covington, Kentucky. I spent 30 days in the psych ward. I stuttered for a few months after that. I had tunnel vision for a while. I was just trying to get high. I was not looking for that. And so, Covington Catholic kicked me out of school. Later on, so I was originally class of 76, then I became class of 77, and then I got my GED in about 79, right? The get her done education, right? And so in 1979, whatever, I would love to have like a class reunion, all the GEDs. We could send flyers around to the prisons and jails, right? The institutions and things like that. Get her big class reunion for the class of 79 GED. But that was me. So the next thing that was affected was my school. The next thing affected was my job situation. I was working a car wash, drying off cars. I'm getting high with my buddy Skeech, drinking, smoking pot up in DeVue Park in Covington. And he said, "Hey, what time you got to be to work?" I said, 4 o'clock. And he said, "Well, hell, it's 4:45 right now." Oh, shit, get my car, and I come out to the car. Long story short, Steve Smith fired me that day. I went offered to get a job as working as a dishwasher at the restaurant. And I know there's some dishwashers. There's always some dishwashers in any AA meeting. And I was a dishwasher. Every dishwasher in the world knows the most important part of the evening was taking out the garbage, because when you went out to take out the garbage, you could get caught up because all your friends have been out there and you're getting ready to get off, so you need to get off. And I would smoke a joint. A customer saw me, told the manager, and I got fired from a job. And so here you've got a guy who can't get through high school, he can't dry off cars, and he can't wash dishes. Where do you go? What can I do? Alcoholism dramatically affecting every aspect of my life. I ended up working this sweatshop at Downing Displays in over the Rhine. It was a long story. It was cold in the wintertime, hot in the summertime, building trade show displays, minimum wage job. Maybe I stayed there a few years. The only reason I was able to last there is there were all kinds of drug addicts and alcoholics that worked there. So we would clock each other in, hey, you're late. All my vacation time was used by March. While I'm working Downing Displays, my brother's graduating from UC Law School with the plan, right? It was there when I was working at Downing Displays. I started getting my own apartment, and I lived in 3 apartments before I got married. Charlestown Square Apartments, 105 University Avenue, and 826 Arlington Road. And I got evicted. Every place and everything that I happened to touch, it's called in the big book, the House of Cards. Everything I do turns to pucky, everything I do. And you know what I've learned is from the outside, looking in to that non-alcoholic, it looks like failure. It looks like failure. Where's Dana? Dana, it's not failure. It's an illness. And I got it. And it would affect every aspect and avenue of my life. Let me tell you the really, really bad news. So I was working this job at Downing Displays. I meet this girl in a bar. God bless her. God bless her. She's actually from Staten Island, New York. She moved here to Northern Kentucky when she was 18. My father-in-law was a retired Brooklyn lieutenant in the New York City Police Department. And my wife, I looked at her that first day, and I knew. When you see her, you'll know. But I was in love with her that very first day. Met her in a bar, we started drinking, and she's what the big book calls a heavy drinking. We drank 7 nights together. Yeah, she'd get a DUI. Yeah, she'd do this. Yeah, she'd do that. But when she got pregnant and we started raising kids, she turned it off just like a faucet, just as if there was no effort whatsoever, because she's not an alcoholic. And the first thing that she noticed was my drinking. Right? Let me tell you how that went down, though. So I had been evicted from 826 Arlington Road. My girlfriend is pregnant, and we weren't going to get married. And this father that I hated had a conversation with me, and I won't go into the whole conversation, but he basically threatened me, and I told him to get out of my house. He wasn't welcome in my home anymore, and I needed him to leave. And he challenged me on going to AA, and I just hated him. And so the thing is I ended up calling his brother Jack, and Jack and his brother Terry took me to my very first AA meeting. But before that, when I got to go into, this is the worst news that I always feel like is alcoholic. When she was pregnant, she had gone to Disneyland or Disney World, whichever one's in Orlando. She went there with her father, her brother, and her sister, and she was going to tell her dad that she was pregnant. And so I called her on the telephone, and I said, "Hon, will you marry me?" How romantic, huh? Right? Hey, babe, let's get married. And she says, "Well, where are we going to live? You just got evicted from that apartment. You got to be out at the end of the month." And I said, "Well, maybe your father will put us up." And that's where I lived for the first year and a half that I was married. I came home from a honeymoon in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and came. And then I had the chance and the opportunity to introduce a whole nother family and a whole wife and children to the beautiful gifts of alcoholism. And it's never pretty. But you know what the amazing thing with that night is after I asked her to marry me, she said yes. And I went out on the porch. Just like in the big book, it says you look up at that starry lit sky. And I look up at those scars, and all of a sudden I began to cry. And I would try and get my finger on it when I was about 5 years sober, like, what happened that night? She just said yes. Do you know what it was? I knew it was going to fail. I knew my marriage was going to fail. I knew way, way deep down inside here that I would be a failure as a father. Why? Because of all my tapes. How'd you do in school? How'd you do at your job? How you doing this? How you doing that? Right? Everything. What about those DUIs and his times in jails and the lawyers and the this and that and the other? See, from the outside looking in, I looked at it as failure. I just had no idea it was an illness. Another conversation with my father was about 5 years marriage. We had a big fight at the family. It's all over my drinking. Dad's on it, mom's on it. My dad confronts me the next day, and that's that time when I go to that AA meeting. And you know what happened at that AA meeting? I could hear. Not only could I listen, but I could hear. And you know what I really and truly believe? We tell the newcomers, listen for the similarities and not the differences. Well, I'm here to tell you, I believe something different, or maybe the same. But I don't believe drunks can hear unless the grace of God has touched that individual, then that drunk can hear. Let me tell you, because I stand before you today, I know who and what I am. In that way, the first line and the first step is we. I love you guys. I'm not here to do service or do this or profound a message. I'm here because I need to be here. This is what ails me. Alcoholism. And I am so grateful to know who and what I am. I heard a great AA speaker just recently at a convention. He talked about the enemy of every alcoholic. Two enemies, delusion and denial. And I got that a step farther, and then the next time I was in a big book meeting, I read about delusion. We've all read about delusion. I was going to see a man about a car in a business I once owned. I was not too, and I go into the bar, and I get the thought that if I put whiskey and milk on a full stomach, I'm good, right? Now that is false evidence appearing real, and it is real evidence appearing false. That's delusion, right? That friend of ours in the big book is delusion. We know that whiskey doesn't go good in milk. It's good. We know what it does, right? But that's the delusion, and that's the enemy. Let me tell you about delusion. Just a friend of mine I went to meetings with for 10 years. And he just come back. And he's got about 2 years today. And John will tell you, I was just going to do a little dope. And it was 25 years. That's delusion. I was just going to do a little. And 25 years later, he comes back to AA. Okay, that's the enemy. The other enemy, denial, that one's also in the book. Denial's in the book. They talk to this alcoholic, and he says, oh, no, why don't you come do what we do and do this stuff? He says, no. I've got what you said. I've got this. I understand. I'm not doing your meetings. I thank you very much for the information. Out comes his slippers and a bottle of booze, dead in 6 months, right? Now, let me ask you this. How many do you think COVID took away? Do you know why? Do you know what the opposite of those two things are for me? I know who and what I am. That's the grace of God. That is the grace of God. I also believe this, too. There's another little thing, and I'm going to get off my tangent. But time is not the goal in AA. It's not the goal. Time isn't the goal. because I know a lot of really, really crazy people. Let me relate another story at another convention. 1,000 people there doing a sobriety countdown, guy in the room, 51 years sober, right? And then it gets down 2 people with 4 days. So they're going to come and they're going to give him the big book. But this guy says, oh, I want to do this from the podium at the microphone. And my thought, right? Oh, what an arrogant. Sure enough, he comes to the microphone and he says, I am 51 years sober. And 6 months ago, I wanted to drink so bad. He said, it took me 48 hours to make a phone call. Delusion and denial. I don't care how long you're sober. You guys know anybody that's 20, 30 years sober that's crazy as hell? I wouldn't rub 2 nickels together for what they have, right? Time is not the goal. Do you know what I believe the goal is? When the first time I read the big book, one of the lines that stood out to me in that big book is the alcoholic lives a double life. And as soon as they said it, they needed no other explanation. I know what a double life is. It is me. I didn't need him to explain the outside life and the inside life. I didn't need that explanation. I knew exactly 2 words, double life. Do you know what the goal in AA is? That's why I even kept worrying about wearing a suit. Do you know why the goal in AA is? For those 2 people to be closest to one another and be authentic. It doesn't mean an absence of defects of character. I still have tons of defects of character. Ask my wife. Right? Just ask Jean. But I have defects of character. I'm still selfish and self-centered, this and the other. But you know what? I'm with you. And I am like you because the grace of God told me that. So let me tell you. So I started getting sober. I heard at my first meeting something enough to get me to my second meeting. And the third day, I was a little sick. I had diarrhea and I was throwing up. I couldn't make it the third day. But the fourth day, I came shaken to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was the very first meeting I ever went to by myself. And I started going to AA meetings. In the grace of God, even though I did not know it at the time, the grace of God was already working in my life. Why? Because I could hear you and I knew it was me. You are people that love to party, you just don't drink. And I had never seen so many of you. And I loved it. I loved AA, and I started going to AA. And sure enough, I went to 405 Oak Street in Cincinnati, and I went there for about a month and a half. And then all of a sudden, I was crazy, irritable, and I thought, this place is nuts. These guys, this guy, what's going, I can't even do this. And what it was is I was afraid. I didn't even want to talk to him. So I started going to Russell Street, and I was the new guy on the block, and everything's fine for about 4 weeks. Then I'm going like, and these people, look at him. And an old timer got a hold of me, a guy by the name of, God rest his soul, Don Deming. Don Deming got me after an AA meeting in Russell Street, and he said, hey, Greg, have you ever thought about doing an inventory? And I said, I really appreciate that. Thanks, Don, but I'm on step 3. Right? Yeah. I appreciate it. And that's what I said. You should have heard what I was thinking. Like, who are you? Mr. AA, blah, blah, blah. And so no big deal. I went, knelt on my knees. I went to bed that night. I hit that pillow, and guess who comes to mind? Don Deming. Who does he think he is? Why did he come up to me? What does he think he's like Mr. AA and I need something? What is it that I said at the meeting? And what I'm telling you and explaining to you are all my thoughts, my feelings, and all my efforts about staying sober. And then I'll tell you about the grace of God. the thought crossed my head, if you don't do that inventory, you're going to drink again. Bam. The next day found me at the same meeting asking Don Deming to help me do that inventory. That's the grace of God. One thought, one feeling. Bam. Let me tell you about what kind of sponsor Don was. He said, what are you doing after the meeting? Right? He knew that when you get a willingness and are drunk, even if it's that thing, jump in, baby, with all fours. And I was about 60 days sober, and I sat down at his kitchen table, and he said, I want you to start right, and you don't have to finish it. You can come back tomorrow. You can take it home with you. I don't care, but I got plenty of work to do in the other room. Just start it. I started writing at 1 o'clock, and it was dark outside. I got sober on December 8th, so it was about February or something like that, but it was dark outside around dinner time, and I said, Don, I'm done. It doesn't take long. When you're 60 days sober, I've done many inventories since, but when you're 60 days sober, I knew what the things were. You know what the things were, right? So sure enough, I started that, and I went home, and I made amends, and this and that and the other, and I made amends where I worked, and I made amends to my parents, and I made amends to different things, and AA has changed my life. But let me tell you this, the same thing ails me today. That's the beauty, to know that I need Alcoholics Anonymous. This idea that I've got this will kill me. I've got a sponsor today. The last inventory I shared, I didn't write it down, but the last inventory I shared with him was about a week, maybe 10 days ago. But I am forever grateful for meeting you and having the grace of God and being able to work the 12 steps and do Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God. And it was after staying sober for a while that I realized that AA was not about failure, because so many things got straightened up in my life. Make no mistake about it. My wife and I have been married for 5 years. My daughter was 5 years old. My son was 11 months old. And I got the chance and the opportunity to start upon this road of complete reconstruction. And the happier I got, the more miserable my wife got. And it was crazy. And I began to walk along on eggshells in my own home. When I look back on it, there I was running off to conferences, going to a couple meetings a day, doing this, doing that, and service work and this and that and the other, right? She's raising 2 kids and this and that and the other. And she's looking at me and she's just angry as can be. I'd love to tell you that what button to push to, allow that to do, but I don't know the button to push. To tell you the truth, I can tell you that you can take action before the grace of God happens, and maybe the grace happens, but I can't even tell you how to get the grace of God. But I do know when it happens. So I remember I was sober about 15 years, and I was doing an institution meeting since I was 2 years sober. It was a jail. It was all multiple DUI offenders. The least amount of time they were locked up for was 30 days. Maximum was 9 months. And they had all these multiple, I'd go in every Friday night, go in there. And why do I go there? Because I am one of them. I deserve. Could you imagine I tell drunks this all the time. Imagine if half the time you carried drugs, you got caught. Just half. Half the times that you drove drunk, you got caught. We'd have thousands. We may have 1 million DUIs in this room. Let your mind wander. I mean, right? And so I would go there so that I could leave and I could be free. And I would come home and I was always happy. And I come home this one night and my wife says, I'm tired of it. Every Friday night, you go off to that jail meeting and you come home all happy. And here I am sitting at home every Friday night. And she knew what my home group was. She knew which night it was. She knew which meetings that I would not negotiate. And so the one thing that it's amazing. I said, well, I'll give that meeting up. Let's start going out on Friday night. And you know what I'm so embarrassed about? Was her answer. I promise you, she doesn't remember her answer. You can ask her when she gets here. She said, you would do that for me? God, honey. So we started going out on Friday night. And the amazing thing happened. We started going to movies, going out to eat, doing this, doing that. It was about 6 or 7 weeks in, and we're at Reality Tuesday's coffee shop having a cup of coffee. Sure enough, we have a cup of coffee, and she says to me, she says, you know, Greg, I'm really glad you're in AA. I said, oh, thanks. That's good. She goes, nah, you don't get it. I'm glad you're in AA. I'm glad you've been involved in AA. I said, oh. Yeah, thanks. And she says, no, I don't think you get it. I'm glad you're in AA. I'm glad you've been involved in AA. And I want you to stay involved in AA. Just gave me my goosebumps, Kim. She hated AA. Hated AA until that moment. Do you know that she's never once said anything about going to a conference, going anywhere, doing this or doing that for AA? Because she knows. You know what helped me with that? My son. So I remember one time she gets me and 3 o'clock in the morning, and she says, somebody's down in our basement. I said, there's nobody in our basement. She says, I'm telling you, somebody's in our basement. I said, nobody's down there. She says, go down in our basement. So I go down in the basement, and there's my son with a bottle of Jägermeister celebrating Tuesday. All right? All right? I said, there's nobody around. He's lit up like a firecracker. Son, what are you doing? I just want to have a little drink. That's my son. Right? Right? Got a DUI when he had his license for 30 days. Started doing this, started doing that, ripping and running, and there it's starting, and he's part of that generation, the Oxycontin generation, the candy. It came out, and he's doing those Oxycontin. And then he was in and out of treatment, and I took him in and out of AA meetings, and back and forth and back and forth. Sure enough, when he was 18 years old, a Cub Calf, he turned 18 in January, and by February he says, I'm out of here. No more school. I'll get a GED. Right? So there's nothing I could do. He's on drugs and this and that and the other. And then later on, now I've got a third generation. My son's son went to Covenant Catholic. And we've got the diploma. 3 generations. It took us 3 generations, but I got the picture. We got the diploma. Hallelujah. But my son would go through all that and all the Oxycontins and this and that and the other. And the last year that he was doing an 80 a day, which is $80 a day. And he made $6,000 that year. He had been kicked out of the house and doing this and doing that. Let me tell you about one of them. The dichotomy of God's world and mystery and about life and how beautiful life is and how ugly alcoholism is. So my daughter's living in Indianapolis without alcoholism. She magna cum laude, he's in graduate school, this, that, and other, married a guy from graduate school, blah, 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 blah. They're on their $1 million, whatever, right? And then my son couldn't get through Covenant Catholic, and sure enough, it's Christmas. And my mother was born on Christmas Eve. And my granddaughter was born on Christmas Eve. My mother's name was Adele, and my granddaughter's name is Adeline, after my mother, her great-grandma. And sure enough, my son is there, and it's Christmas, so we're going to come from northern Kentucky, go up to Indianapolis to have Christmas in a hospital room with our newborn baby and this and that and the other. And my son is dope sick and sleeps for 18 hours in a hospital bed right next to the labor and delivery. And of course, you know what that's like, but I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we get to have Christmas. Now, I don't need to tell you, because you know who and what you are, that my son didn't get anything for us for Christmas that year. Okay? But we would give him things that we could do, and cards and clothes and this and that and the other. And sure enough, my wife was going to stay in Indianapolis with our daughter and the newborn baby, and I was going to take my son back home to northern Kentucky. And we were halfway home. And she said, Greg, he's got my credit card. That was my Christmas present. He stole the credit card. And I hung up the phone. He says, about 15 minutes later, hey, Dad, I got to go to the bathroom. Can you stop at the gas station? I said, no, I can't, son. He said, I got to go to the bathroom. I said, just pee in the car. I really don't care. But we're not stopping. And I had to take his jacket off and search his jacket. I had to take his shirt off and had to take his pants off. And it's in his underwear. Merry Christmas. We were bringing life into the world on Christmas. And I had to put my son out that night. Alcoholism. I'd like to thank you in AA. I'd like to thank everyone in here for giving me my son back, because my son is 15 years sober. And I want you to know that I don't care who you are and what you are, that your parents know that you're sober. They know. I know. You know what the hard part is right now? Do you know why I came up with this story of delusion and denial? Because my son, goes about and does AA. All of his friends don't do AA anymore. All very successful. Right? His best friend, growing up with him, went to grade school with him, high school with him, had to go to prison for OxyContin. David gets sober. He's 2 years sober, and he gets out of jail. Sure enough, he comes, and this and that and the other, and he gets sober, and he stays sober for a while, stops going to AA, was working for a pizza parlor out of jail, manages the pizza parlor, takes his real estate license, gets his real estate license, and rides the wave. Rides that real estate wave, baby. It was a nice one, wasn't it? It was a nice wave. And man, he's up there, and now he is a 6 handicap on the golf course. He's a member of Triple Crown. He's got a big, nice house and this and that and the other, and he's dope sick. Oh. My son's best friend. All the guys my son golfs with, not one of them do AA anymore. Why does that mean so much to me? Delusion and denial. Oh, I've got this. I've got this, right? All the people that have got this. And I just have the same enemy in me. That's why I'm here to tell you. There is no greater gift in this person's life than to know who and what I am. In any opportunity that I have become more authentic of who and what I was meant to be as God's creation, that is by God's grace. There is plenty more that has to go on. I can be just as crazy in a New York minute as anybody else. I can be just as crazy. but I thank God for my solution. I don't want to be that guy with 51 years. That did not happen in a day, a week, or a month. It happened over a long period of time. And the last thing in the world that I want in AA is to walk into a meeting and have time. You know, right? I just don't want time. What I want in AA is what my sponsor, Mike Dries, gave me. Mike Dries had a ton of defects of character. But what you see is what you got. That's exactly who he was. And that's the guy who taught me about trying to be authentic, to be who and what you are. And so all the suit may look nice. There's a drunk on the inside, right? I really appreciate you guys. Listen, I really appreciate the people having me here. And thanks, Phil, for asking me, and I love you all. Thanks.